everyone, welcome to part 3 in my beginner's knitting series. So in part 1 we covered the basics of getting your materials, how to choose your yarn and how to choose your knitting needles. In part 2 we covered casting on, how do we get live stitches onto our needles so we are ready to begin our project. And now we are ready for part 3, learning to knit. So I'm going to show you guys how to do the basic knit stitch, and we'll actually learn how to do this 2 ways. So we'll learn something called English style, and then we'll follow that up with continental style. Let's start knitting. As with my previous casting on demonstration, I've chosen to use medium weight yarn and size 8 knitting needles. So the first thing we want to do is get our needles into our hand. So I'm going to grab the empty needle in my right hand. I'm going to support it with the last 3 fingers on my right hand, and I'm going to touch the needle with my thumb and index finger, but really I want those to be mobile. Those are kind of what's going to make knitting happen. So these lower 3 are just supporting the needle, and this is what's going to help me in the actual knitting process. I'm going to do a similar thing with my left hand, supporting with my last 3 fingers and having the ability to move my thumb and index finger on both hands. This may be a little bit awkward at first, just kind of getting used to how that feels in your hand. Something I did when I started was I would anchor my left hand needle in my belly button and let my right hand needle do all the work. It was enough to get me started, to get me going. But this is kind of what you want to build towards. This is how you want to be holding them as you advance in your work, as you start becoming more proficient as a knitter. Alright, so we're going to attempt our first knit stitch, and to start I'm going to show you guys how to do this in what we call the English style. So the first thing we're going to do is, using our right hand needle, we're going to isolate the first stitch on our left hand needle. What we want to do, and I'll actually just make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we're trying to do, is I want to use this needle and slip it into that stitch. So we're going to show that again. Using your right hand needle, you touch in between your first 2 live stitches and you slip into the first stitch underneath your left hand needle. So right now we've got our working yarn in between our 2 needles. So what I want to do is, if you can, it might not be super comfortable at first, but you can let go of your right hand needle and just kind of pinch it using your index finger. So we've still got the same 3 fingers supporting the left hand needle, but like I said, we really want to be able to use our thumb and index finger at all times to keep moving. So using your index finger, just grab your right hand needle and secure it to the left hand needle. So with our right hand, we're gonna go under the needle, grab our yarn from the middle, pull it kind of away from ourselves and towards the index finger on our left hand. Now here's where we really start to do the stitch. What I want you to do is bring the yarn towards the working stitches over the top of your right hand needle. To complete the stitch, go ahead and grab hold of your right hand needle with your right hand again, using your thumb and index finger to secure the yarn, to hold it in place, and we are going to pull through the first stitch. So now I have a stitch on my right needle and I still have 15 stitches on my left needle. All we've got to do is let that stitch fall off the left hand needle. So now I have 1 stitch on my right hand needle, 14 on my left hand needle, and 15 total for my project, which is what I want. That's what I started with. That's what I want to maintain throughout all of my work. So we're going to try that again. So isolate the first stitch on your left hand needle. You want to find the space between the first stitch and the second stitch on the needle. Put the tip of your right hand needle into that stitch. So going from the front to the back, staying underneath the left hand needle. Our yarn is in between our needles, so we come with our right hand and grab it, come towards our index finger, wrap that working yarn over the top of our right hand needle, hold it secure, and now we pull through the left hand needle and move that stitch off. So speeding up ever so slightly, we're coming into it, wrapping our yarn around and pulling the stitch through. So we keep going like this until we reach the end of our row. Let's try that again, except this time we're going to do continental style. So the difference between continental knitting and English knitting isn't about knitting the stitch itself. It's actually about how you hold your needles and how you hold your yarn. So with English style, I was using my right hand to control my working yarn. In continental style, I'm going to transfer that to my left hand. This is preferred for me. It feels more comfortable. It's what I'm used to, and it's also faster for me to control the yarn in my left hand. So we're going to start off the stitch the same way. We're going to kind of isolate the first stitch on our left hand needle. We're going to get our right hand needle into that loop, front to back, staying underneath the left hand needle. So now when I grab for my yarn, I'm going to use my left hand instead. So I'm going to do almost exactly what I did last time, which is bringing it towards my index finger on the opposite hand, except this time I'm just going to go over the top of my right hand needle, then down, and now I'm ready to pull the stitch through and let it drop off the left hand needle. So we're back to 1 on the right hand, 14 on the left hand. So we're going to try that again. The exact same method of finding our stitch, going in front to back, right hand needle stays underneath. Now that's my tail. Now I grab my working yarn, wrap it over the top, come towards my right index finger, drop it down. I can use my middle finger if I want to hold that stitch. It doesn't really matter. All we want to do is just make sure it stays on the right hand needle as we pull through the left stitch and make our stitch. Zooming ahead a little bit to what happens when you get to the end of your row. So right now I have 13 stitches on my right hand needle and only 2 remaining on my left hand needle. So we're going to go into, pull our yarn around, pull it through. Same thing on the final stitch. Into that loop, front to back, stay underneath your left hand needle, over the top and down, pull through. Alright, so now I have 15 on my right needle and nothing on my left hand needle. What we're going to do to keep this party going, switch hands. And that's all there is to it.
So as you knit across each of these rows, you're building the foundation for what we call the garter stitch. So really all that means is that you knit across your row, you trade which hand your needle is in, and then you knit across the next row, and you just keep doing that until you reach the end of your project.
And those are the basics. You are now officially a knitter. So I highly encourage you to just practice that basic knit stitch. Just keep going back and forth along your rows, building that muscle memory, learning the technique, getting really comfortable with knitting. I also really encourage you to try alternating between continental knitting and English knitting. So I didn't start doing continental until maybe 5 or 6 years into my knitting process, so it was something that kind of came to me over time. It just started to feel a little more comfortable holding the yarn that way. But that is totally up to you. Try both, try one and love it and stick with it forever. That is completely up to you. So now that you have that basic knitting, that garter stitch pattern, you are ready to end your work. So that's going to be the next video in the series, the final video in the series, what to do when your project is complete. So please join me in the next video where we will learn how to bind off.